"You're just the court interpreter." The prosecutor sneered, loud enough for the gallery to hear, and the woman in the gray cardigan did not flinch. Curtis Vandermeer said it the way a man flicks lint from a sleeve, half a smile writing the words, his eyes already sliding past her to the jury he was performing for. He had no idea he had just dismissed the most decorated person in the room. It was 9:47 in the morning in Courtroom 4B of the Harlan County Justice Center, and the radiator under the windows ticked like a slow clock, and the light came in flat and gray through tall, dirty glass, and a man's life was being decided 11 feet from where she stood. The defendant's name was Tomas Aguilar, 41, a quiet welder with a graying mustache and hands that had built bridges in 2 countries, and he was accused of an armed robbery he swore he did not commit, and the state wanted 19 years. 19 years. She had written the number on her stenopad without meaning to, and then she had looked at it, 4 digits that would take a man from 41 to 60, and she had drawn a thin box around it the way you box a thing you intend to argue with later. Her name was Diana Reyes. To the docket she was court-certified interpreter number 2207, Spanish to English, seat assigned to the left of the defense table, and that was all anyone in 4B believed her to be. She had spent a long time making sure of that. The robbery had put a 63-year-old man in the hospital, and the man Diana sat beside swore on his children that he had been 9 miles away and asleep, and somebody, somewhere, did not care whether that was true. Diana had read the discovery the night before at her kitchen table, 340 pages, twice, and somewhere around the second pass at 1 in the morning, something had gone very quiet behind her eyes. She had noticed something. She noticed things. It was the one habit she had never been able to retire. But that was not yet the moment, and so when Vandermeer turned his sneer on her over a translated phrase he did not like, she only folded her hands and waited, plain as a closed door. The interpreter will confine herself to interpreting, Vandermeer said to the bench, though he was still looking at the jury, and not to lawyering. She translates words. That is the job. Maybe we can all remember our lanes today. A few people in the gallery laughed, the small, ugly laugh of a room that has already decided who matters. Stay in your lane. He had not used those exact words, but the room heard them anyway, and so did she, and she filed the phrase away with all the other phrases men in expensive suits had handed her across the years, the ones who confused volume with understanding and a title with a mind. Judge Eleanor Two Rivers, 60, silver-haired and tired in the way of judges who have watched too many easy convictions, looked over her glasses and said, "Mr. Vandermeer," in a voice that was a warning and not yet a sentence, and he raised both palms in mock surrender, and the moment passed, and the trial went on. Diana translated the next question into Spanish for Tomas, and his answer back into English, and her voice was even and exact, neither warm nor cold, a clean pane of glass set between 2 languages. Nobody watched her do it. That was the point of her. In the 3rd row of the gallery, behind the rail, an old man in a plain dark suit sat very straight with both hands resting on a wooden cane, and he was the only person in the room watching Diana instead of the prosecutor, and his name was Aldous Hartman. And what he would do before the day was over would empty that room of its certainty like a stopper pulled from a drain. But he sat still for now. He was good at waiting, too. What none of them knew, not Vandermeer, not the jury, not the board bailiff by the door, was that the woman they had filed under furniture had once carried a very different title in rooms far worse than this one, and that she had trained herself deliberately over years to be exactly this overlooked. Being underestimated was not her wound. It was her cover. It was the space the loud men kept handing her, and she had learned to do her best work inside it. There was a weight in her cardigan pocket that the room could not see, A small, heavy thing of brass she turned over with her thumb when she was thinking, and she was thinking now, and the brass was warm from her hand, and on its worn face were 3 Latin words and a single number, and that number was the only honest thing about her that had entered courtroom 4B that morning. By 4:30 that afternoon, Curtis Vandermeer would stand in this same courtroom and watch a 2-star general rise from the gallery and salute the court interpreter he had ordered to know her place, and he would understand, far too late, that he had built his whole case on a foundation someone quiet had already found the crack in. He just did not know it yet. None of them did. Before we go any further, if stories about quiet people who get underestimated and turn out to be the most formidable person in the room are your kind of story, do me one favor right now. Hit that like button and subscribe to Unspoken Valor so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from, the city, the town, the country, because I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Drop your city down below, say it loud, and let us find out who is out there with us tonight. Now, back to courtroom 4B and the woman they thought was furniture. To understand how Diana Reyes ended up standing in the corner of someone else's trial, you have to understand that she had built her whole quiet life on a single decision made 8 years earlier, which was to disappear in plain sight. She lived alone in a second-floor apartment 3 blocks from the courthouse, with a coffee maker she ran twice a day and a window that faced east, and every morning she drank the first cup standing up while the light came over the rooftops, because a habit from a long time ago told her to see the day before the day saw her. She wore the same kind of clothes to every assignment: a soft gray cardigan, a plain blouse buttoned to the collar, flat shoes, no jewelry except a thin watch she kept set 2 minutes fast. 2 minutes fast because in the life she did not discuss, 2 minutes had once been the difference between a convoy that left on her timing and a convoy that did not, and she had never gone back to true time the way some people never go back to a name. She did not wear the ribbon. It lived in a cigar box on the top shelf of her closet, a small rectangle of striped cloth she had earned in a place she did not talk about, and beside it lay a heavy brass coin the size of a silver dollar, worn smooth on one face, stamped on the other with a crest and 3 Latin words and the number 9, and she carried that coin in her cardigan pocket every working day and had for 8 years. The Latin said, in translation, "The quiet ones hold the line." The number was the number of her old unit. The men who had handed her that coin were scattered now across 3 time zones and 2 cemeteries, and the coin was the only one of its kind she had ever seen outside a sealed box, and she did not explain it to anyone, ever, because to explain it was to give back the cover she had paid for it with. She turned it over in her fingers when she was thinking. She was turning it over now. People who met Diana described her, if they described her at all, as nice and quiet and good at her job, and they forgot her face within the hour, and that was precisely the outcome she had engineered. The truth, metered out here in fragments because she would never offer it whole, was this: before the cardigan, before court-certified interpreter number 2207, there had been a uniform, there had been a unit with a number for a name, there had been years in rooms where the wrong word, rendered wrong, got people killed, and where she had learned that the loudest person in any room is rarely the one who actually understands it. There had been a night, the one she never let herself walk all the way back into, when a frightened man across a folding table had said a thing in his own language that the senior interrogator, certain and loud and wrong, had taken for a lie, and Diana, a junior linguist then, with no rank to speak of and no permission to speak at all, had heard the truth inside it, the small grammatical tell that meant the man was not confessing but warning, and she had broken every rule of her place and said so, plainly, into a room full of men who outranked her, and they had not wanted to listen, and an old colonel in the corner had listened anyway, and 3 people had been alive by morning who would otherwise not have been. That colonel's name she would not say even now, but she had learned 2 things that night that she had built the rest of her life on: that the truth often arrives in the mouth of the person no one is listening to, and that it takes exactly 1 person in a position of power who is willing to listen to turn the whole room. She had spent the years since being by turns both of those people, the one no one listened to and the one who listened, and she had learned which was harder, and it was the listening, because the listening cost you something, and the being overlooked cost you nothing but your pride, and pride, Diana had decided long ago, was a thing she could do without. And there had been a second life layered over the first: law books, an officer's commission, a courtroom that wore camouflage, because the same mind that had mastered languages had turned out to be very, very good at the law, and the army had used both, and for 2 hard years she had done the work that ends careers, which is the work of auditing evidence that powerful people wanted left alone, and she had been good at it, and it had cost her, the way it always costs the ones who do it, and at the end of it she had taken off the uniform and put on a cardigan and disappeared, and she had told herself she was done. She had been wrong about that too. You are never done. There is always another room, another frightened man, another loud, certain voice, and the only question is whether you will have made yourself too comfortable to notice. But all of that was packed away with the ribbon, metered out to no one, carried only in the weight of a coin and the habit of a watch set 2 minutes fast. In her working life she translated. She showed up early, set out her water glass and her steno-pad, did not editorialize, did not advise, and rendered one human being's words into another's without adding her own weight to either side, which is harder than it sounds and is its own kind of discipline. Court interpreters are sworn, the same as witnesses. They raise a hand and promise to be true and accurate, and Diana took that oath more seriously than most of the lawyers in the building took theirs. She had taken oaths before. She knew what they cost when they were real, and she knew what it looked like when a person treated one as a formality, and she had spent a career on the difference. She had been assigned to the Aguilar case 11 days earlier by the court's language access office, routine paperwork, a name on a calendar. She had met Tomas Aguilar exactly twice before trial, both times in the small attorney-client room with the buzzing fluorescent light, where his public defender, a young woman named Nora Fitch, sat with too many folders and not enough sleep, and where Diana's only task was to make sure that what Nora said reached Tomas intact and what Tomas said reached Nora intact. And in those 2 rooms, doing nothing but listening, Diana had begun to notice things. She noticed that Tomas did not talk like a man hiding a robbery. He talked like a man who could not understand why the floor had opened under his feet. She noticed the calluses on his hands, the specific flat shine of a welder's palms, and she noticed that he kept folding and unfolding a paper bus transfer from the night of the robbery, the way a man keeps touching a wound to see if it is still there. She noticed that when Nora described the state's evidence, a grainy gas station video, a partial fingerprint, a paper receipt, a confession-adjacent statement Tomas swore he had never made, his confusion was specific, not general. He kept saying in Spanish a sentence Diana rendered for Nora as, "That is not my voice on that paper." She noticed that Nora Fitch was drowning, carrying 140 open cases, and that she believed her client and could not prove him, and that nobody with any power was listening. And she noticed the night before trial at her kitchen table, on the second pass through the discovery at 1 a.m, with the coin warm in her hand, the thing that would eventually pull the whole structure down. But she said nothing, not yet, because Diana Reyes had learned in the place she did not talk about that you do not fire the first round you have, you confirm it, You build it, you wait for the ground to be right, and the ground was not right, not at 9:47 in the morning, with Vandermeer performing for the jury, the gallery laughing, and a silver-haired old man she had never met sitting straight-backed in the third row, turning over his own kind of patience. So she folded her hands, and she translated the next question, and she let them all go on believing she was nobody at all. It is a strange thing to be invisible on purpose. Most people spend their lives trying to be seen. Diana had spent 8 years learning the opposite craft, and she had gotten so good at it that she sometimes forgot, for whole weeks at a time, the woman who lived under the cardigan. The coin reminded her. The coin always reminded her. She had a rule about the coin, a small private liturgy. She touched it once before she entered a courtroom and once when she left, and in between she let it stay in her pocket, because the work in between was supposed to belong to the room and not to her. This morning she had touched it twice on the way in. She had not noticed she had done it until she was already in her seat. That, too, she filed away, because it meant some part of her already knew that this trial was not going to be like the others, that the line between the woman in the cardigan and the woman in the sealed box was about to get very thin. The state's case, laid out across that first long morning, was clean the way a freshly mopped floor is clean, which is to say, you could not see what had been wiped away. Vandermeer built it brick by brick for the jury, and he was good at it, genuinely good, with the easy baritone of a man who had won far more often than he had lost and had stopped counting either way. On the night of March 3rd, he said at 11:52 p.m., a man in a dark hooded jacket had walked into the Sunoco station on Route 9, struck the night clerk, a 63-year-old named Walter Briggs, across the temple with a tire iron, emptied the register of $410, and walked out. The state had 3 things, Vandermeer said, holding up 3 fingers like a teacher. 1. Surveillance video showing the assailant's build and gait. 2. A partial fingerprint lifted from the register drawer matched to the defendant. 3. A signed statement taken at the station house in which the defendant placed himself near the Sunoco that night. He let each finger fall. The jury watched the fingers. Tomas Aguilar sat very still through all of it, and twice he leaned to Diana and whispered, and twice Diana leaned to Nora and translated, low and exact, and the second time what Tomas had said was, "The clock on that video is wrong," and Nora wrote it on a legal pad and underlined it and did not yet know what to do with it. Diana knew. Diana had known since 1 in the morning, but she translated it flat, without weight, because the weight was not hers to add, and she watched Vandermeer's second chair, a young prosecutor named Pell, slide the video exhibit into the laptop and cue it for the screen. When the video played, the courtroom went darkish, the blinds half drawn, and on the screen a grainy figure in a hooded jacket crossed the frame, and in the lower right corner a white timestamp read 11:52, 14 p.m., March 03rd. The jury leaned in. Diana did not look at the figure. Diana looked at the timestamp and at the corner of the frame and at the faint band of pixels along the bottom edge where the numbers sat, and something went quiet behind her eyes again, the way it had at her kitchen table, because the night before, in the discovery, she had found the original sensor log from that same Sunoco camera system, a boring spreadsheet, an export of motion trigger events, the kind of file prosecutors disclose by the 100 and nobody reads, and the original sensor log had no motion event at 11:52 at all. It had a motion event at 10:09 p.m., and it had another at 12:31 a.m., but the stretch from 11:40 to 12:20, the exact window the video claimed to show, was blank. No motion, no trigger, nothing recorded, which meant the video on the screen with its tidy white 11:52:14 p.m. was either from a different night or a different camera, or had had its timestamp altered after the fact. One of those 3. There was no fourth option. Diana had checked it 3 times at her kitchen table, the way she checked everything 3 times, and then she had set down the coin and looked at her dark window for a long while, because she understood what it meant, and she understood that no one in this building was going to want to hear it. A wrong timestamp is not a clerical error when it is the spine of an armed robbery case. A wrong timestamp is the difference between a man who was at the Sunoco and a man who was, as Tomas swore, asleep in his own bed 9 miles away, with his phone charging on the nightstand. She had looked at the pixels along the bottom of the video, too, the thin band where the timestamp lived, and she had seen what a trained eye sees and a juror never does, that the numbers were a hair too sharp, a hair too white, sitting a half pixel proud of the grain around them, the way text sits when it has been laid over an image rather than burned into it by the camera that shot it. She could not prove that from her seat, but she had seen it, and once you have seen a thing, you cannot agree not to have seen it. And the fingerprint. Diana had read the latent print report twice as well. The partial had been lifted from the register drawer and matched to Tomas at, the report said, 9 points of comparison, which sounds like a lot to a juror and is, in fact, thin, and the comparison had been performed and certified by a single analyst at the county forensic unit, a supervisor named Royce Keller, whose name Diana had written in her steno pad and circled, not because she translated his name, but because she had seen it before on a different report in a different case 2 years ago, when she had interpreted for a different frightened man. She noticed things. That was the trouble with noticing things. You could not unnotice them, and they accumulated, and at some point the weight of what you had noticed became a thing you had to do something about. Oath or no oath, lane or no lane, but not yet. Vandermeer ended the morning on the signed statement, reading it aloud in his easy baritone. I was over by the Sunoco around 11. I needed cigarettes. And Tomas's face when Diana translated the English back into Spanish for him was not the face of a man hearing his own confession. It was the face of a man hearing a stranger wearing his name. Diana had read that statement 3 times, too. Tomas did not smoke. The statement said he had gone out for cigarettes. It was a small thing, the kind of detail that a tired detective inserts to make a confession sound lived in, and it was wrong, and it was the kind of wrong that only the person being framed would ever catch, and Tomas had caught it, and no one had listened. And when the judge called the lunch recess, and the jury filed out, and Nora Fitch put her head down on her folders for 1 exhausted second, Diana Reyes quietly slid a single page across the defense table, a printout of the censor log with 2 times circled in pencil and the blank window bracketed, and she said in English, in her flat, true voice, just 4 words, "Ask about this clock." Then she gathered her steno pad and went to eat her lunch alone, as she always did, and she did not look back to see Nora pick up the page, but she heard the young lawyer's breath change. That was its own kind of answer. The afternoon session is where it began to turn, though no one but Diana could have told you so at the time. Nora Fitch came back from the recess with the censor log page paper-clipped to her cross-examination outline and a new dangerous clarity in her eyes, the clarity of a drowning person who has just felt sand under one foot. The state's first afternoon witness was the responding officer, a patrolman named Diaz, and Nora's cross was unremarkable, careful, laying pipe. But the second witness was the one that mattered. A technician from the security company that serviced the Sunoco's cameras, a nervous young man named Foss in an ill-fitting blazer, called by the state to authenticate the video, to swear it was a true and accurate recording from the Sunoco system on the night in question. And it was here, in the gap between what Foss had been coached to say and what Foss actually knew, that the first board came loose. Vandermeer walked Foss through it smoothly. "This is footage from the Sunoco system. Yes. Pulled in the ordinary course? Yes. And the time shown is the system time? Yes, said Foss, and Vandermeer nodded and sat, satisfied, and Nora Fitch stood up with one page in her hand. She did not raise her voice. She had learned something, watching the quiet interpreter slide a page across a table. Mr. Foss, she said, your company exports a motion event log from that camera system, correct? A pause. Yes. Every time the camera detects motion, it logs the time? Yes. I am handing you Defense Exhibit 1, the motion event log for the Sunoco camera, March 3rd, exported by your own company. Do you recognize it? Foss looked at it for a long moment. The courtroom was very quiet. Vandermeer's pen had stopped moving. Yes, that looks like one of ours, Foss said. Read me the events between 11:40 p.m. and 12:20 a.m., Nora said. And Foss looked and looked again, and the color went out of his face because there were no events between 11:40 and 12:20. The log went from 10:09 straight to 12:31. There, Foss said. There are no entries in that window. No motion was detected for 40 minutes, Nora said. According to the log, no. And yet the state's video claims to show a man entering, attacking Mr. Briggs, and leaving at 11:52 p.m. inside that exact window, during which your own system recorded no motion at all. The silence in 4B changed temperature. Vandermeer was on his feet. Objection! The witness is not a forensic video analyst. He can't speak to... And the judge said, he can read his own company's log. Counselor, overruled. And something flickered across Vandermeer's face that Diana had been waiting all day to see. Not guilt, not yet. Annoyance. The annoyance of a man whose clean floor has a footprint on it. From the third row, the old man with the cane watched all of this without moving, and when Diana glanced up, just once, just to read the room as she always read the room, she found his eyes already on her, calm and assessing, and for 1 second the two of them looked at each other across the rail, the only two people present who understood what had just happened. And then she looked back down at her steno pad, and he looked back at the witness, and the moment closed like water. She did not know him. She was certain she did not know him. And yet there had been something in the way he looked at her. Not curiosity, not the idle interest of a spectator, but recognition, the specific recognition of one professional clocking another, and it unsettled her in a way very little did, because Diana Reyes had spent 8 years not being recognized, and being recognized was the one thing her whole quiet architecture was built to prevent. She turned the coin over once in her pocket. The afternoon ground on. Nora got Foss to admit the log was authentic and that he could not explain the missing window. She got him to admit further that the timestamp on a video file could, in his words, theoretically be edited if someone had the system password. Vandermeer objected to edited, and the judge sustained it, but the jury had heard the word, and you cannot unring a bell. And Diana watched two jurors in the back row exchange the smallest of glances. Then Nora did one more thing, the thing the page had taught her to do, which was to ask who had access to that password. And Foss, sweating now, said the password was shared among the security company, the station owner, and, for diagnostics, the county when they request a pull. And at the word county, Diana's thumb stopped on the coin, because the county was Royce Keller's house, and a thread she had not expected to find this early had just shown itself in the daylight. It was not victory. It was a long way from victory. A defense attorney can raise a question. Raising a question does not free a man, and Vandermeer still had the fingerprint and the signed statement, and the state still had 19 years on the table, and the machinery of a criminal trial does not stop because one witness went pale. But a crack had opened. Before the recess, though, the state put on the witness whose testimony was supposed to seal it. Walter Briggs himself, The 63-year-old night clerk, the man who had been struck across the temple with the tire iron, moving slow and careful to the stand with a faded scar still visible at his hairline, and the jury softened toward him at once the way juries soften toward the genuinely hurt. Vandermeer was gentle with him, walked him through that night step by careful step, and Briggs told it plainly. The bell over the door, the figure in the hood, the blow that put him on the floor, the register left open and empty when he came to. It was good testimony, true testimony, and it was not the testimony of a liar. Walter Briggs had been robbed and hurt, and he was telling the truth as he knew it. And that was exactly what made it dangerous to Tomas, because a true victim is the most persuasive thing in any courtroom, and the machine had counted on that. But Diana, translating none of this because Briggs spoke English and Tomas only needed her for his own words, was free for once to simply listen, and listening was the thing she did better than anyone in the room, and so she caught the one sentence the prosecutor walked past. "I never got a look at his face," Walter Briggs said. "It was dark, and it was fast, and he had the hood up. I couldn't tell you who it was. I only know it wasn't a big man. He was on the smaller side. Quick." On the smaller side, Diana wrote nothing, but Tomas Aguilar was a broad-shouldered welder, 6'1", 210 pounds, and the figure in the altered video was indeed slight and quick, smaller than the man sitting beside her, and the victim, the state's own wounded victim, with no reason on earth to help the defense, had just told the jury that the man who hit him was not built like the man on trial, and Vandermeer had let it go by because it did not fit the story he had been handed, and Nora Fitch, 3 feet from Diana, had caught it too, and had underlined it, and the two women did not look at each other, but something passed between them anyway. It was the third crack, and it had come from the one witness no one could accuse of bias, and it was the moment Diana stopped wondering whether Tomas was innocent and became certain of it. Not that her certainty mattered to the record, but because there is a difference between defending a man you suspect and defending a man you know, and she had just crossed it, quietly, in her assigned chair, with her hands folded and her face arranged into nothing at all. And the man who had served Diana the look across the rail rose during the next recess, slowly, leaning on his cane, and made his way not toward the doors but toward the clerk's station, where he spoke a few quiet words and showed a card from his wallet, and the clerk straightened and nodded and made a note, and Diana, gathering her things 20 feet away, did not see what the card said. She saw the clerk's posture change, though. She saw a bored county employee come, briefly, to something very close to attention, and then catch herself and sit back down, and Diana had seen that exact small, involuntary straightening before, many times, in many rooms, and it always meant the same thing. Someone had just realized they were standing in front of more rank than they had expected. She would find out who soon enough. For now she only knew that the ground was beginning, finally, to feel right. Diana did not sleep much that night either. She sat at her kitchen table again under the single hanging bulb, the coin beside her water glass, and she did the thing she had been trained to do, which was to stop trusting the part of the case that had gone her way and start hardening the part that had not. The video timestamp was wounded but not dead. A clever prosecutor would argue the camera's motion sensor had simply failed for 40 minutes. A coincidence, unlucky for the defense, and juries forgive coincidences. The fingerprint was the real spine now. 9 points, certified by Royce Keller. So Diana spread the discovery across the table a third time and read the latent print package the way she read everything, slowly in 2 languages at once, the language of the words and the language of what the words were avoiding, and she found the second thing. The latent print, according to the chain of custody form, had been lifted at the scene on March 4th at 8:15 a.m. by a crime scene tech, sealed in evidence envelope number 44C, and logged into the county property room at 11:02 a.m. But the comparison report, Keller's report, the one that matched the print to Tomas, was dated March 4th, time-stamped 9:40 a.m., which was impossible. The print could not have been compared and certified at 9:40 in the morning if it had not reached the property room until 11:02 and had not been signed out to the lab until Diana turned the page, found the lab intake log, 1:30 that afternoon. The report was dated almost 4 hours before the evidence physically arrived at the lab. You do not analyze a fingerprint you do not have. Diana sat back. The bulb hummed. Outside, a car passed, and its headlights swept the ceiling and were gone. There were innocent explanations for a single wrong date, a tech who post-dated a form, a clock set wrong, a clerk's typo, and Diana, who was careful, wrote all of them down. But she also did the thing the careful do, which is to ask whether the errors pointed in a direction, and these did. Every error in the Aguilar file leaned the same way, toward Tomas. The video timestamp put a phantom at the Sunoco at 11:52. The print report existed before the print did. Both manufactured the same lie from 2 different rooms. That was not coincidence. Coincidence does not have a preferred outcome. And then she pulled the steno pad with Royce Keller's circled name, and she remembered why she had circled it, and she went to the cardboard file box she kept in her hall closet. Not the cigar box, the other one, the boring one, the one where a careful person keeps copies of her own old assignment notes, and she dug until she found her interpreter notes from a case 2 years gone, a different frightened man, a different charge, and there it was, in her own small handwriting. The same analyst, Royce Keller, the same county unit, a fingerprint match at 9 points of comparison, a man named Delgado who had taken a plea rather than risk 15 years and was, as far as Diana knew, still inside. 2 cases, same analyst, same suspiciously round 9 points, same flavor of evidence that arrived a little too clean and a little too early. And that was the moment the case stopped being one man's bad luck and became something with a shape. Diana Reyes had spent a career learning to tell the difference between an accident and a pattern, between a man who makes a mistake and a system that produces a result, and what was sitting on her kitchen table at 2 in the morning was not a mistake. It was a product. Someone, somewhere, was manufacturing convictions, and Royce Keller was a hand on the line, and Curtis Vandermeer, loud, vain, performing Vandermeer, might not even know it. He might be exactly what he appeared to be, a man who trusted the evidence handed to him because the evidence handed to him had always made him a winner, which was, Diana thought, its own kind of corruption. The corruption of never having to look down at the floor you are standing on. She made a small chart, because charts were how she thought when words ran out. 2 columns, Delgado and Aguilar, and a row for each kind of evidence, and as she filled it in, the symmetry got worse and worse. Both men poor, both men working trades, both men with thin priors that made them easy to believe guilty. Both cases closed fast with a clean 9-point print and a confession that read a half step off. Both prosecuted, she would later confirm, out of the same office on the same conveyor, by lawyers who never had reason to look behind the evidence because the evidence always held up just long enough to win. And one column had a 3rd row, the other did not, a name she did not have yet. The name of whoever decided which poor man with thin priors got fed into the machine, because a machine does not choose its own inputs. Somebody chooses, and Diana underlined the empty space where that name would go, and she promised it to herself. There is always a final name. She did not sleep. She made coffee at 4 and drank it standing at the east window and watched the dark go gray, and she made a decision, the second great decision of her quiet life. She was going to do something about it, not as the interpreter. The interpreter could not. The interpreter's oath forbade it. She could render words, she could even, carefully slide a true document across a table, but she could not investigate, could not advise, could not advocate, could not become a party to the case she was sworn to translate neutrally. To cross that line would taint the trial and hand Vandermeer a mistrial and put Tomai right back at the start with a burned interpreter and a poisoned record. So she would have to do it the hard way, the slow way, the right way. She would have to get the truth in front of the only people who could act on it, Nora, the judge, and whoever sat above Royce Keller in the dark, without ever once stepping out of her lane, which meant she would have to be for a few more days exactly the invisible woman they all believed she was, while quietly making sure the right person found the right thread and pulled. She put the coin in her cardigan pocket. She went to court, and the old man with the cane was already there in the third row, watching the door as if he had been expecting her, and this time, when their eyes met, he inclined his head, just slightly, the smallest of nods, and Diana understood, with a cold, clean drop in her stomach, that he knew exactly who she was. His name, she learned that morning, was Aldous Hartman, and he was on the state's own witness list, buried near the bottom, listed only as character witness, defense adjacent, which told her nothing and everything. Because Aldous Hartman was not there about Tomas Aguilar. He was there about the security guard, Walter Briggs, the 63-year-old clerk who had been struck with the tire iron, because Walter Briggs had, 40 years ago, served under a young lieutenant named Hartman, and the old general had read about the case in the county paper and recognized his old soldier's name and come, as old soldiers do, to sit in the room and bear witness for a man he had once led. That was the thread that had pulled Hartman into courtroom 4B. But it was not the thread that made him rise. What made him rise was the other thing he had recognized, the woman at the defense table in the gray cardigan, translating with a precision he had seen exactly once before in his life, a long time ago, in a country he did not name even to himself anymore, in a tent that smelled of diesel and dust, where a young officer had sat across a table from a frightened man and turned his words into truth so cleanly that 3 lives were saved by nightfall. Aldous Hartman never forgot a face that had done its job under fire. He had spent 50 years collecting them, and so when the morning session opened and Vandermeer, smarting from the day before, came out swinging, reasserting the fingerprint, rereading the signed statement, rebuilding his clean floorboard by board with a little more force than the day required, it was Hartman who during the mid-morning recess walked his cane up to the defense table and stood before Nora Fitch and said, in a voice like a closing door, "Counselor, I think I can be of use to you, and I think," he added with the smallest glance at Diana, "you have been of more use already than you know." Nora, exhausted and out of her depth, and suddenly faced with a 2-star general she had not known was in her courtroom, did the smartest thing she did all week. She listened. And Diana, 3 feet away, gathering exhibit copies that did not need gathering, listened too, and what Hartman told the young public defender, low and fast, changed the shape of the afternoon. He told her that he had spent his last decade in uniform running an office that did nothing but review courts-martial for tainted evidence, that he knew in his bones and in his files what a manufactured case looked like, and that everything about the Aguilar file, from what he had heard across 2 days, had the wrong smell. He told her the missing motion log window was not a sensor failure. Sensor failures leave error codes, and there were no error codes, only a clean gap, which is what you get when someone deletes events rather than when a camera fails to record them. He told her that an altered timestamp on a video, if a true forensic examiner pulled the file's metadata, would carry a second hidden time, the file's own creation stamp, written by the disk and not by the editor, and that the 2 times, the one a human typed and the one the machine recorded, would not match, and that the mismatch was a fingerprint of its own, harder to fake than the picture. He told her, in short, what Diana already knew and could not say, and a few things Diana had suspected and could not yet prove, and Nora wrote all of it down with a hand that had stopped shaking sometime in the last day. And then he said the thing that stopped Diana's hands over the exhibits. "Your interpreter," General Hartman said to Nora quietly, not looking at Diana now, giving her the dignity of not being looked at, "is not what the gentleman from the state thinks she is. When the time comes, and you will know when, do not be surprised by what stands up in this room, and do not let him," a nod toward Vandermeer, "bury what she has already handed you." Then he went back to the third row and sat down and folded his hands on his cane and waited, because he was good at waiting too, and because he understood, as Diana understood, that the truth could not be shouted into a courtroom. It had to be walked in slowly, on procedure's own 2 feet, or it would not stay. The afternoon belonged to Nora Fitch, and she rose to it. With the general's read and the interpreter's page, she recalled the forensic supervisor, Royce Keller, to the stand. The state had listed him. She had the right, and she walked him, calm and merciless, through the chain of custody timeline that Diana had built at 2 a.m. When did the print reach the property room? 11:02 a.m. When was it signed out to your lab? 1:30 p.m. And your comparison report is dated, Nora held it up, 9:40 a.m. How, Mr. Keller, did you analyze at 9:40 a print you did not receive until 1:30? And Royce Keller, who had certified 1,000 prints and never once been asked to account for the hours between them, made the mistake that careful liars make under pressure. He reached for a small lie to cover a large one. "The report date is a clerical placeholder," he said. "We date them when we open the file, not when we finish." "So you opened the file at 9:40, Nora said, "on a print that was in the property room across town until 11 and would not leave for your lab until after lunch." A pause. "The dates in our system can be set in advance." "Set in advance," Nora repeated, and let it sit. And in the third row, the old general closed his eyes for a moment like a man hearing a familiar, ugly note, and at the defense table, Diana Reyes translated the exchange into Spanish for Tomas in a voice that did not change at all, and only her thumb, moving once across the worn face of the coin in her pocket, betrayed that anything at all was happening inside her, because she had heard it. The crack in Keller's voice, the reach for the small lie. It was the sound of a man who had done this before, and it was the sound, underneath that, of a man who was afraid of someone, because Royce Keller did not have the face of a mastermind. He had the face of a middle manager who had been told what the answers needed to be and had stopped asking why, and Diana had interrogated enough men in her old life to know the difference between a man protecting himself and a man protecting the person above him, and Keller, sweating on the stand, was doing the second thing. There was someone above him. There was always someone above him, and that someone, Diana now understood, was the empty row at the bottom of her chart, the final name, and he was somewhere in this building, and he had just watched his careful machine cough in open court, and a man like that would not sit still. Between the second day and the third, the machine made its first real move to protect itself, and it made it the way machines do, not with violence, which leaves marks, but with paper, which does not. It started with Delgado. Diana had written the name in her stenopad on the first morning and circled it. The man from 2 years ago, the frightened welder before this frightened welder, the one who had taken a plea on a 9-point print rather than gamble 15 years, and she had assumed he was a closed door. A man somewhere in a state facility serving out a sentence for a crime he very likely had not committed. He was not a closed door. He was, it turned out, a living person with a sister, and the sister cleaned offices in the evenings 3 buildings down from the courthouse. and Diana knew this only because the universe is small in a county like Harlan, and because she had, in her old, careful life, learned never to assume the people in a file had stopped being people. She did not go to the sister. That would have been advocacy, and the oath held. But she did the one thing the oath allowed, which was to be in a public place at a public time, and so she ate her lunch, 2 days running, at the diner where the evening cleaning crews took their break, and she sat with her water and her steno pad, and she listened, because listening was the one thing no rule had ever been able to take from her. And on the second day, she heard the sister, 3 booths down, tell another woman in a low, frightened Spanish that Diana understood without trying that a man in a suit had come to the apartment asking whether her brother had ever talked to anyone about his case, whether he had kept any papers, whether anybody had been around asking questions lately, and that the man had been very polite and had left a card, and that the card had frightened her more than rudeness would have because the card said county. Diana finished her water. She did not turn around. She wrote nothing down where it could be seen, but something had moved in her chest, cold and clarifying, because the visit to the sister meant the machine had felt the floor shift and was checking its old seams, walking back through its previous work to see whether anything had been left loose, and that meant the people running it understood, as she understood, that a pattern is only dangerous once a second case lines up beside the first. They were trying to make sure no second case ever did, which meant the Delgado file, the old one, the original, the proof that Aguilar was not a single error but a repetition, was exactly the thing they would reach for next, and Diana had a photocopy of her own 2-year-old interpreter notes on that case in the cardboard box in her hall closet, and the cardboard box, she already knew, had been opened once. So that night she did the thing that turned out to matter most. Days before, she understood why. She did not wait to be robbed. She assumed it. She took her Delgado notes and the new Aguilar pages, and she sat at the kitchen table under the bulb, and she made not 1 copy but 4, by hand and by camera both, and she did the small, unglamorous arithmetic of a person who has had things taken before. 1 copy stays, 1 copy goes to the post office box across the county line, 1 copy goes into an envelope addressed to a federal officer 3 states away, and 1 copy, this was the part the old training insisted on, goes somewhere no reasonable person would ever look, which in Diana's case was the lining of a winter coat she had not worn since the last cold snap, slid flat between the wool and the satin and sewn shut with 6 neat stitches, because a professional searches the obvious places thoroughly and the absurd places not at all. It felt theatrical. It felt like the woman in the sealed box and not the woman in the cardigan. She did it anyway because the cost of being wrong about whether they would come again was a man's 19 years, and the cost of being right and unprepared was the same, and when the arithmetic comes out the same on both sides, you do the careful thing. The near failure came the next morning, and it was so quiet that a less careful person would have walked past it. At the courthouse, the public records window, the one open until 4, the one where closed cases sit out for anyone to pull, had a new sign taped to the glass, System Maintenance, Archive Retrieval Suspended. It was the most ordinary sign in the world. Government systems go down. Archives get re-indexed. There was nothing in it a person could point to, but Diana stood in front of that sign with the coin gone still in her pocket and read it for what it was, which was a door being quietly closed before she could walk through it, because someone had realized that the public record, the boring, dusty, unguarded public record, was the one place the pattern could be assembled by anyone who cared to look, and they had moved to lock it without locking it, to make it unavailable without making it suspicious. For one bad moment she thought she had been too slow. Then she remembered that she had already pulled the disposition she needed 2 afternoons earlier, before the sign, before the maintenance, before anyone thought to close the door, 5 names, 5 clean 9-point prints, 5 fast endings, 5 photocopies all ready in her bag, and that the machine, in moving to shut the window, had only confirmed that the window was the thing that mattered. You do not board up a door no one is trying to enter. She walked away from the glass, with her face arranged into the mild patience of a temp whose errand has been inconvenienced, and inside, behind her eyes, something had gone very quiet and very certain, because she now understood the rhythm of the thing she was fighting. It did not threaten, it tidied. It did not break the law in front of you. It adjusted the conditions until the law could not be used against it, and it did so politely through the proper channels, with a card that said county and a sign that said maintenance. And that was, Diana thought, the most dangerous kind of corruption there is, the kind that has learned to look exactly like procedure. The only way to beat a thing that hides inside procedure is to be better at procedure than it is. She had spent 11 years learning to be exactly that. And so she did not panic, and she did not move early, and she did not fire the round she was holding. She let the maintenance signs stay up. She let them believe the window was closed and the temp was harmless and the old Delgado file was sleeping. She went back into Courtroom 4B with 5 photocopies they did not know she had, and a coat in her closet they would never think to open, and she sat down in her assigned seat to the left of the defense table, and she folded her hands, and she waited for the ground to finish becoming right. It was almost there. She could feel it under her like the deck of a ship coming about. One more day. That night the case stopped being something that happened in a courtroom and became something that followed Diana home. She knew the signs. She had been trained in them in the life she did not discuss. The unfamiliar sedan parked across from her building with a man in it who was not waiting for anyone. The second click on her phone line, faint, that had not been there a week ago. The way the cardboard file box in her hall closet sat half an inch off the line, she always left it on, because Diana left everything on a line, a habit from a place where a moved object meant a search, and the box had been moved. Someone had been in her apartment. They had not taken the box. They had read it and put it back almost right, which was worse than taking it, because it meant they were not thieves, they were professionals, and they wanted her to wonder, and they wanted her to be afraid. Diana stood in her small kitchen with the coin in her hand and was, for exactly 4 seconds, afraid. Then the fear went quiet behind her eyes, the way everything went quiet behind her eyes, and she did what she had been trained to do with fear, which was to convert it into a list. She did not call the police. The county forensic unit answered to the same building as the county police, and she did not yet know how far the rot reached. She did not call Nora. A frightened public defender with 140 cases could not protect a witness, and Diana was not going to make the young woman a target. Instead, she made copies. She had, over 2 sleepless nights, photographed every relevant page, the motion log, the chain of custody form, the impossible 940 report, her own 2-year-old notes on the Delgado case, and now she did the thing the careful do, which is to assume your single copy will be taken and make sure it is not your only one. She mailed a sealed envelope to a post office box she had kept for 8 years and never used, the kind of insurance a person keeps when she has lived the kind of life Diana had lived. She emailed an encrypted archive to an address she had not contacted in years. A name from the old life, a JAG officer she had trained beside, a woman named Okafor, who now sat on a federal review panel and who would, Diana knew, recognize the smell of a manufactured case from 3 states away, and she wrote one line in the body of the email, no greeting, no signature, because Okafor would know the hand. Quiet 9th. I need this looked at by someone who cannot be reached from Harlan County. Quiet 9th. It was the old unit's name for itself, the words from the coin in plain speech, and Diana had not typed them in 8 years. and typing them now felt like turning a key in a lock she had welded shut, and she sat for a moment with her hands off the keyboard before she sent it, because she understood that the woman who sent that email could not go back to being only the interpreter afterward. She sent it anyway. Then she put the kettle on, because the next necessary thing after securing the proof was to be calm, and being calm started with small, ordinary rituals, and Diana Reyes had survived worse rooms than this one on the strength of small, ordinary rituals. The next morning, the sedan was gone. In its place was a different message. When Diana arrived at the courthouse, the language access office had a note for her. Her assignment to the Aguilar trial was under administrative review, and a substitute interpreter might be appointed to avoid any appearance of impropriety, effective possibly as soon as the following day. It was elegant as threats go. No one had touched her. No one had said a word she could repeat. They had simply begun, through the proper channels, to remove the one set of eyes in that courtroom that had read the file in 2 languages and found the seam. Diana understood the move completely. She had made versions of it herself long ago against worse people, in a better cause, and it told her something useful. It told her that someone above Royce Keller had noticed her noticing, which meant the someone above Keller existed, which meant the pattern had a top, which meant there was, somewhere, a name. There is always a final name. That afternoon she got closer to it. During the recess, she did the one piece of legwork her oath allowed, which was to do nothing that touched the Aguilar case at all, and instead to walk, on her own time, to the county clerk's public records window and pull the thing that any citizen may pull, the docket histories of closed cases, public as a phone book. She asked plainly, like a clerk doing a clerk's errand for the disposition records on a list of names, Delgado among them, and 4 more she had pulled from 2 years of her own interpreter calendar, 4 more frightened men she had translated for and half forgotten, and the pattern came up out of the paper like a face out of fog. 5 cases, 5 poor men, 5 clean 9-point prints, all certified by the same unit, 4 of them by Keller himself, 5 fast pleas or fast convictions, and one thing more, the thing she had been missing, the thing that turned a pattern into a name. Every one of those 5 cases had been signed off, at the charging stage, by the same supervising prosecutor, the man whose initials sat in the corner of each charging document, the man who decided which cases the office would carry and which it would let go. R.M. Whitlock, the chief deputy district attorney, Curtis Vandermeer's boss, not the loud man performing for the jury, the quiet man 2 floors up who chose the inputs. Diana stood at the records window with 5 photocopies in her hand and the coin gone still in her pocket, and she understood that she had just found the bottom of her chart, and that the bottom of her chart had an office on the top floor of this very building, and that she was, at that moment, the only person in Harlan County who could see the whole shape of it, and the most replaceable person in the building, a temp with a steno pad whose assignment was under review. So she went to find Nora Fitch, and she did the most that the interpreter's oath would permit, and not 1 inch more. She did not say, "They searched my apartment." She did not say, "They are trying to remove me." She did not say the name Whitlock. She did not advise. She did not advocate. She did not become a party. She said, in her flat, true voice, handing over the case file copy as a sworn interpreter is entitled to do, "If I am replaced tomorrow, the new interpreter will not have read the discovery. You should make your record today, all of it, while someone in this room still has." And then she added one thing more, a thing that was not advice because it was a matter of public record any citizen could find, which is the narrow gate she walked through. The clerk's window is open until 4. Closed cases are public. If I were building a record, I would want to know whether what happened here happened before. And Nora Fitch, who had grown 3 years wiser in 3 days, looked at the quiet woman in the cardigan and understood that she was being handed something at great cost, and she said, "Who are you?" And Diana said, "I'm the court interpreter," and picked up her steno pad and went to take her seat, and that the flat, perfect, unfalse non-answer was its own kind of answer, and Nora would remember it for the rest of her career. Across the gallery, the old general watched the exchange, and watched Diana sit, and watched the substitute interpreter note get passed to the clerk, and his jaw set, and he made a decision of his own. He had been waiting for the right moment to stand. They had just tried to take the moment away, so he would make one. The climax of the Aguilar trial did not look like a climax. There were no raised voices, no slammed fists, no surprise witness running through the doors. There was only a Thursday morning, gray light through tall windows, a radiator ticking, and the most dangerous thing in any courtroom, which is a careful person who has finally assembled enough true facts that the lie can no longer hold its shape. It began with Vandermeer overplaying his hand, because vain men under pressure always overplay their hands. Stung by 2 days of slipping ground, and Diana suspected pushed from somewhere above him, because the new exhibit had the overeager smell of an order rather than a strategy, he opened by moving to admit a fresh document, a supplemental forensic affidavit from Royce Keller signed the night before, that purported to clean up the timeline problem by asserting now that the print had actually been hand-carried to the lab early, before the property room intake, by a courier whose name had been inadvertently omitted from the chain of custody. It was a patch, a second story stacked on the first to cover the gap. And it was, Diana saw at once, a fatal mistake, because the new affidavit did not erase the old contradiction. It added a second sworn statement that contradicted the first, and now there were two official documents that could not both be true, signed by the same man, and the existence of two irreconcilable sworn statements is not a problem you can patch. It is a confession with extra steps. Nora Fitch stood to oppose the motion, and she had, paper-clipped to her notes, the page the quiet interpreter had slid across the table on the very first day, and the chain of custody timeline, and her cross notes from Keller's set-in-advance admission, and the 5 docket histories she had pulled from the public window before it closed at 4, and behind her in the third row sat a 2-star general who had spent a decade learning exactly this kind of unraveling, and she had, though she did not fully know it yet, the truth on her side, which is the only ally that never gets tired. "Your Honor," Nora said, "the state now offers a document that directly contradicts its own chain of custody and its own witnesses' prior sworn testimony. Mr. Keller testified Tuesday that the report date was a placeholder set in advance. Today he swears the print was hand-carried by a courier who appears nowhere in any log. These cannot both be true. I would ask the court to take judicial notice of the contradiction, and I would ask—" And here Nora paused and gathered herself and stepped at last fully through the door that Diana had opened and Hartman had widened. "I would ask the court to order an independent forensic audit of the entire Aguilar evidence package and of the analyst who assembled it, and to take judicial notice of 5 other closed cases in this county, a matter of public record, that share the same analyst, the same 9-point print, and the same supervising signature. Because what is in front of this court is not a chain of custody. It is a construction." The word landed in the room like a dropped stone. Vandermeer was up instantly, baritone climbing. "Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of theatrical overreach. The defense has a missing censor log and a clerical date and now wants to put the entire county forensic unit on trial and to drag in 5 unrelated cases that have nothing to do with this defendant. They have the same analyst and the same signature, Counselor," said Judge Two Rivers, and her voice had changed. The tiredness had burned off it, and underneath was something hard and old and awake, the thing that makes a person become a judge in the first place, which is precisely what makes them relevant. It is not theatrical to ask how a report came to be dated 4 hours before the evidence existed. I have been on this bench for 19 years. I know what a clerical error looks like. This is the third time this week your forensic unit's paperwork has reversed itself under oath. It was at that moment that the rear doors of Courtroom 4B opened, quietly, and a man came in who had not been there for any of the 3 days, a trim gray man in a charcoal suit who did not sit in the gallery but walked up the side aisle to the bar and leaned down to murmur in Vandermeer's ear, and Diana, who had spent a career reading the body language of men who held power without ever raising their voices, knew before anyone told her exactly who he was. R.M. Whitlock, the chief deputy, the initials in the corner of 5 charging documents, the bottom of her chart, walked into the room on his own 2 feet to put out a fire he had heard, 2 floors up, beginning to smoke. He did not announce himself. Men like Whitlock never announce themselves. The announcing is what they pay men like Vandermeer to do. He simply stood at the prosecution table with a hand resting on it, proprietary and calm, and said in a low, even voice pitched for the bench, "Your Honor, R.M. Whitlock, Chief Deputy District Attorney. With the court's permission, I'll assist Mr. Vandermeer on this motion. The state has no objection to an audit of the Aguilar evidence. We welcome it. But the defense's attempt to import 5 unrelated closed cases is improper, prejudicial, and outside the scope of this proceeding, and I'd ask the court to confine us to the matter actually before it." It was a beautiful move, and Diana admired it the way you admire a clean weld even when it is holding up something rotten. He had conceded the small fight, the audit of this one case, in order to wall off the large one, the pattern, and he had done it in the calm, reasonable voice of a man with nothing to hide, and if Judge 2 Rivers had been a tired judge on an ordinary day it might have worked, but she had stopped being tired somewhere on Tuesday. "Mr. Whitlock," she said, "I know who you are. Your initials are on all 5 of those charging documents. That does not make the cases irrelevant. It makes you a witness." And Whitlock, who had not expected the judge to have read the corner of the page, went very still in the particular way that careful men go still when a fact lands that they did not plan for, and at the defense table Diana Reyes did not look up, because the worst thing she could have done in that moment was look like a person who knew anything, and instead she turned the coin over once, slowly, in her pocket, and waited. And then the morning turned on a hinge so small that most of the gallery missed it, because Vandermeer, rattled, reaching, with his boss's eyes on him and his easy baritone life coming apart at the seams, made the error that would end him. He turned in front of the jury, in front of the judge, in front of the silent gray man who had just been named a witness, and he aimed his frustration at the easiest target in the room, the quiet woman who had been nothing but furniture for 3 days, the one safe place a cornered man could still feel large. "And let's be clear about where this is coming from," Vandermeer said, jabbing a finger toward the defense table toward Diana. "This entire fishing expedition started with a document the interpreter, decided to hand to defense counsel. She is not an investigator, she is not a lawyer, she is a translator, she translates words. With respect, Your Honor, maybe before we burn down a county lab, we ask why the help is doing the lawyering." The help. The word hung there, ugly and bright. A few people in the gallery shifted, Nora's jaw tightened, and Diana Reyes, in her gray cardigan, set down her pen, and for the first time in 3 days she went still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. Not the stillness of the overlooked, but the stillness of a person deciding whether the ground was, at last, right. It was. She did not stand. She did not speak. That was not hers to do. The oath still held, and she would honor it to the final inch. But behind her, in the 3rd row, with the slow, deliberate care of an old man and the absolute authority of a soldier, An old hand closed over the head of a wooden cane and pushed, and the courtroom, sensing something, began to quiet. "Your Honor," the old man said, and his voice, though soft, carried to every corner of 4B the way certain voices do, the way command does. "My name is Aldous Hartman. I am on the state's witness list. Before I am called, and before counsel says another word about the help, I would ask the court's brief indulgence. I believe I am the only person in this room qualified to identify the interpreter, and I believe this court should know exactly who has been sitting at that table." Judge Two Rivers looked at him for a long moment. "And who are you, sir, to identify her?" And Aldous Hartman straightened to a height the cane had been hiding, and the years fell off him, and he said, "Major General Aldous Hartman, United States Army, retired. 38 years, the last 10 running evidentiary review for courts-martial across 3 commands." He let it settle. "I have signed off on the records of a great many soldiers. I have signed off on hers." The silence in 4B was total now. Even the radiator seemed to have stopped. Curtis Vandermeer's mouth opened and nothing came out, and Diana Reyes closed her eyes, just for a moment, because 8 years of careful invisibility were about to end in a room full of strangers, and there was a grief in that, and a relief in it, and both of them went quiet behind her eyes at once. What happened next, the people in courtroom 4B would describe differently for years afterward, the way witnesses to a single lightning strike each swear it hit a different tree, but they all agreed on the shape of it. Judge Two Rivers, who had the power to shut the old general down and did not, who had watched her courtroom be used as a clean floor for 3 days and had finally seen the footprint, said, "General Hartman, this is irregular, but this court has heard a great deal of irregular testimony this week, most of it from the state. I will hear you, briefly." And Aldous Hartman turned, not to the judge, not to the jury, not to Vandermeer, but to the woman at the defense table, and he addressed her directly for the first time, across the rail, across 8 years, across a tent that had smelled of diesel and dust. "Major Reyes," he said. The name moved through the room like a change in pressure. "I did not expect to find you here," Hartman said gently. "I came for Walter Briggs. He was mine, a long time ago, and I read his name in the paper, and I came to sit with him, the way you sit with your own. I did not know I would find you in the corner of this room, doing the thing you always did, which is the thing no one ever notices until everything depends on it." He looked at the bench. "Your Honor, the woman the state has spent 3 days calling the interpreter and the help is Major Diana Reyes. She served 11 years in the United States Army, the first 6 as a combat linguist attached to civil affairs and interrogation support in 2 theaters, where her work, I will say only this much, the rest is sealed, directly saved the lives of soldiers and civilians on more than one occasion, and earned her a decoration this court would recognize the weight of if I were permitted to name it, which I am not. The last 5 she served as a judge advocate, a military attorney. She prosecuted and she defended, and for 2 years she did exactly what defense counsel is doing right now. She audited evidence that other people wanted left alone, and she was very, very good at it, and it cost her, the way it always costs the ones who do it." He paused. "She does not wear the ribbon. I understand why, but I have spent 50 years standing up for soldiers who would not stand up for themselves, and I am not going to sit in a chair and let a man in an expensive suit call her the help, while she quietly saves his case from being the worst mistake of his career." And then Major General Aldous Hartman, 81 years old, leaning on a cane he no longer seemed to need, drew himself fully upright and turned to face Diana Reyes squarely and brought his right hand up in a slow, exact, unhurried salute, the kind you give an equal, the kind you give someone you have seen do the work, and he held it for a long 3 seconds in a county courtroom full of people who had spent 3 days believing she was no one. An old general stood at attention and saluted the court interpreter. No one in 4B moved. Nora Fitch had a hand pressed to her mouth. 2 jurors had risen halfway out of their seats without realizing it. The bailiff by the door had come to an unconscious attention of his own, a reflex 30 years deep, and Curtis Vandermeer stood frozen at the prosecution table, his clean floor gone, his sneer gone, his whole easy baritone life rearranging itself behind his eyes as he understood all at once and far too late exactly who he had been calling the help. And Diana Reyes stood. She had not meant to. The oath said sit, translate, render, stay neutral, stay invisible, but you do not let a man like Aldous Hartman hold a salute alone, not if you have ever worn the thing he was honoring, and her body knew it before her mind agreed, and she rose from her chair at the defense table, plain in her gray cardigan, and she returned the salute, one soldier to another. It was the first time in 8 years anyone had seen the woman under the cardigan, and what they saw was not glamorous and not triumphant. It was only true, a tired, exact, dignified woman who had been carrying more than anyone guessed, returning a courtesy she had earned in rooms none of them would ever see. Then she lowered her hand, and she sat back down, and she picked up her pen, because she was still the court interpreter, and there was still a man beside her whose life was on the table, and the salute, however it had emptied the room of its certainty, had not yet freed Tomas Aguilar. That part came not from the salute, but from procedure, which is, the narrator will note, exactly as it should be, because a salute is a gesture, and gestures do not free the wrongly accused. Proof does. Judge Two Rivers, let the room breathe. Then she did the thing that the salute had made possible, which was to stop pretending the state's evidence deserved the benefit of the doubt. In light of the contradictions in the state's forensic record, she said, the sworn testimony reversing itself under oath, the unexplained gap in the surveillance log, the chain of custody impossibility now compounded by a second contradictory affidavit, and the pattern across 5 closed cases sharing the same analyst and the same supervising signature, this court finds reasonable cause to question the integrity of the entire evidence package in this case. She looked at Vandermeer. I am ordering an immediate independent forensic audit. I am suspending these proceedings pending its results, and I am directing the clerk to forward the entire file, including Mr. Keller's 2 contradictory affidavits and the 5 docket histories now before the court, to the Office of the Attorney General and to the Federal Review Channel that has, I am informed, the smallest glance toward the 3rd row, already opened an inquiry into the pattern of convictions associated with this county's forensic unit. Diana's thumb went still on the coin in her pocket. The Federal Channel, Okafor. The email had reached the only person in the country who could not be reached from Harlan County, and the inquiry had opened, and now it had a courtroom record to feed on, and the name at the bottom of her chart, R.M. Whitlock, who was no longer 2 floors up but standing at the prosecution table with his hand frozen on the wood, had just had his 5 careful cases handed by a sitting judge to people he could not call off. The judge was not finished with him. Mr. Whitlock, she said, and the whole room turned to the gray man who had walked in expecting to wall off a fire and was now standing inside it. You came down here to keep 5 cases out of this record. They are in it now. You told me the state welcomes an audit. The state is going to get a thorough one, and since your signature is on every one of those charging documents, you will not be assisting Mr. Vandermeer on anything further in this courtroom. You are excused. I expect you will be hearing from the Attorney General's office and from the Federal Channel about the other 4. Whitlock did not argue. That was the tell. The last one, the one that confirmed everything. A man with nothing to hide argues, a man with everything to hide calculates, and Diana watched him calculate, watched the math run behind his calm gray face. How much was already gone? How much could still be saved? Who could still be cut loose to slow the rest? And then he inclined his head a precise half-inch. the bow of a man conceding a single battle to buy time in a war, and he gathered nothing because he had brought nothing, and he walked back down the side aisle and out the rear doors, and the doors closed behind him with a small final sound, and that was the last anyone in courtroom 4B saw of the man who had chosen the inputs. He would surface again, months later, in a federal filing, in small type, but he walked out of 4B on his own 2 feet, unhandcuffed, unhumiliated, already working the angles, because that is how the men at the top of these things usually leave the room, not dragged, not shouting, just quietly recalculating, and Diana, watching him go, felt no triumph, only the old clean weariness of a person who has seen exactly how far a single afternoon can move a thing this large, which is some, but never all. The ground was right. It had taken 3 sleepless nights, a young lawyer brave enough to listen, an old general who never forgot a face, a federal officer 3 states away, and a woman who had trained herself to be overlooked so that, when it mattered, she could see what everyone else had agreed not to. But the ground was finally fully right, and here is the part that the people who tell this story tend to leave out, because it is not the satisfying part. It was not clean, and it was not finished. Tomas Aguilar did not walk out of that courtroom a free man that afternoon. He walked out on a suspension of proceedings, which is not an acquittal. It is a pause, a held breath. A man returned to a cell while the audit runs. He had already lost 4 months in the county jail awaiting trial. He had lost his job at the fabrication shop the week he was arrested. His wife had taken 2 buses each way to sit in the gallery and had stopped being able to afford it by the 2nd week. None of that came back because a general saluted an interpreter. Justice, when it came for Tomas, came the way it really comes, slowly, partially, and at a cost no verdict ever repays. The audit took 11 weeks. 11 weeks is a long time to a man in a cell and an eye blink to an institution, and both of those things were true at once, the way both things are always true at once. When the independent examiner finally pulled the metadata from the Sunico video file, the thing Hartman had told Nora to ask for, the hidden second time the disk writes and no editor can reach, the file's creation stamp came back as March 12th, 9 days after the robbery, which is to say the video the state had sworn was recorded the night of the crime had in fact been assembled more than a week later. The timestamp typed in by a human hand and laid over the grain, a half-pixel proud, exactly as Diana had seen from her seat and could not say. The fingerprint was worse. The audit found that envelope 44C had been opened and resealed at least once between the property room and the lab, and that the print Keller had certified at 9 points did not, on independent re-examination by 2 outside analysts, match Tomas Aguilar at all, did not match him at 3 points, let alone 9, and had likely been compared, the examiners concluded, against a card pulled to fit a name that had already been chosen. Already been chosen. That was the phrase in the report, dry as a bone, that confirmed the empty row at the bottom of Diana's chart. The name had come first. The evidence had been built to fit it. That is the whole machine, described in 4 words by people who did not know they were describing a machine. Tomas Aguilar's case was dismissed with prejudice in the fall, which means the state may never bring it again, and he walked out of the Harlan County Justice Center on a cold, bright morning into his wife's arms, and he did not look back at the building, and no one filmed it, and that is probably as it should be. He got a settlement, eventually, smaller than the years were worth, because the years are never worth what they pay you for them. He got his name back, which the paper had run in large type on the way in and small type on the way out, as papers do. He did not get the 4 months back, or the job, or the particular kind of sleep a man sleeps before he learns that the floor can open under an innocent foot. Royce Keller was indicted, so the following spring, after the federal review did its slow grinding work, was R.M. Whitlock, the chief deputy who had chosen the inputs from 2 floors up, who had never once touched an evidence envelope and had directed the touching of hundreds, and whose careful conveyor was, by the time the indictments came down, the subject of a review of more than 40 closed cases, some of which would be overturned, and some of which, for want of a living witness or a surviving file, never would. Justice is real, the narrator will tell you, but it is rarely clean, and it is almost never complete. Some of those 40 men were already out, having served their time for things they did not do. Some were still in. One had died inside 2 winters before anyone looked at his file again. The system that had manufactured them did not collapse in a single dramatic afternoon. Systems do not. It was pried open, one pulled thread at a time, by people who noticed, and the noticing cost every one of them something. Curtis Vandermeer was not indicted. He had not known. The review found no evidence that he had known, and that, in the end, was its own verdict on him. Harsher, in a way, than a charge would have been, because the question that followed him out of that courtroom and into the rest of his career was not, "Are you a criminal?" but "How did you stand on that floor for 15 years and never once look down?" He left the district attorney's office within the year. People said he had lost a step. What he had lost was the thing he had never known he was standing on, which was the assumption that the evidence handed to a winning man is clean because he keeps winning. He sent Diana a letter once, the spring after. It was 3 lines long. It did not say sorry exactly. Men like Vandermeer rarely manage the word whole. It said that he had thought a great deal about the word he had used, and that he understood now what had been sitting at that table, and that he would not forget it. Diana read it once, standing at her east window with the first cup of coffee going cold in her hand, and then she put it in the cigar box on the top shelf, beside the striped ribbon she still did not wear, because some things you do not display and do not throw away. You simply keep them, as proof to yourself of a thing the world tried to tell you was not there. As for Diana Reyes, she went back to work. The administrative review of her assignment evaporated the way such things evaporate once the wind changes. No one ever did appoint the substitute interpreter, and no one ever explained why the review had opened, and Diana did not ask because she already knew, and asking would only have made someone lie to her. She still wears the gray cardigan. She still keeps the watch 2 minutes fast. She still drinks the first cup standing up, facing east, seeing the day before it sees her, and she still carries the coin in her pocket on every working day, the heavy brass one worn smooth on one face, with the crest and the 3 Latin words and the number 9, and she still turns it over with her thumb when she is thinking, and she is still to almost everyone who passes her in the marbled halls of the Harlan County Justice Center nobody at all. The interpreter, the quiet one, the woman you forget within the hour, she prefers it that way. She always has. Being underestimated was never her wound. It was the space the loud men kept handing her, and she had learned a long time ago, in rooms far worse than 4B, to do her best work inside it. There is a young public defender in that building now, 3 years more confident than she was, who learned in a single week that the most important person in a room is very often the one no one is looking at, and who has, taped inside the cover of her trial binder where only she can see it, 4 words in a flat plain hand. Ask about this clock. She has pulled the clerk's public records on her own cases ever since. She noticed once a 9-point print that did not sit right, and she did something about it, and a man went home who would not have. That is how it actually travels. The thing Diana carries, not in a salute, which is a gesture, but in a habit, passed quietly from one person who notices to the next. And the old general, Aldous Hartman, comes by the courthouse still, now and then, slower each year, and he sits in the 3rd row of whatever trial is running, not because he has business there, but because he made a promise 50 years ago to stand up for the ones who would not stand up for themselves, and he means to keep it until he cannot. He and Diana do not speak much. They do not need to. Once, on the courthouse steps in a thin autumn light, he stopped beside her and said only, "Still not wearing it," and she said only, "Still don't need to," and that was the whole conversation, and it was its own kind of answer, and they both understood it, and they went their separate ways. So here is what is left for you, the ones still listening at the end of a long story. You have sat in rooms with a quiet person in the corner, the one nobody watches, the one filed under furniture, the one some loud and certain voice has just told to know their place. Everyone has. The only question is which person you decide to be in that room. When the next quiet one in the corner is dismissed in front of you, and there will be a next one, there is always a next one, will you be the gallery that laughs the small, ugly laugh because the room has already decided who matters? Or will you be the one who looks again, who notices the thing that does not fit, who asks about the clock? Because the people who hold the line are almost never the loudest people in the room. They are the ones who noticed and stayed and did the next necessary thing when it cost them something to do it, and the only way the line ever holds is if, when their moment comes, somebody quiet enough to see them finally stands up. That was tonight's story from Unspoken Valor. Some heroes never ask to be seen, but they are always, always worth the salute.